So again, welcome to the Getting Them to Come Back webinar, what you can do and what you cannot do to bring back your customers, clients, and employees. As we mentioned earlier, this webinar is being offered in Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. We will also be recording this webinar. The reason for that is that we are hoping that we can make it available to other people who are not able to attend at a later date. In order to allow you to ask questions and answers, we will have a question and answer function, which is in the lower, it's about the center of your lower part of your screen. If you enter items into the Q&A section, we should be able to answer those. Generally, we will answer those at the end of the presentation rather than during them. But if the question is fairly clear, your question may be answered early. We will also make announcements via chat. So if you are looking for a link, that's a good place to pull that from. Also, at the end of this event, we will be asking you to participate in a survey that helps us better understand how we can be of more use to you as you go along. Just to reiterate, in terms of getting access to the language functions, there's a world at the lower right-hand corner. And if you click on it, you'll be able to select the language that you are interested in, including Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin. This main channel will be for English. All right, a couple of disclaimers. Basically, there are some legal issues that will be covered here. They will not be exhaustive, and they are not a substitute for legal advice. The questions, if you were to ask questions, they are not protected by attorney-client privilege. So keep that in mind as you're asking questions, as you may not want to be too specific, particularly on a recording. Also, the other disclaimers relate to the information that we're providing. We are doing the best we can to be able to offer the best information we can possibly. But not all of the information will always be interpreted correctly, or we're not offering any, we're not accepting any liability for the use of the information in this presentation. All right. As I said earlier, my name is Des Woodworth. I'm an Economic Development Officer with the City of San Jose. This webinar is part of a series that we're offering in order to provide San Jose and businesses in the greater area access to information that will help them overcome the COVID issues. This coming week after today's event, we will be offering office hours on the 22nd, during which you can bring questions that you're interested in, and we will have a panel of people who will be able to answer questions for you. And then on the 29th, we'll have a webinar on tips for sole proprietors and very small businesses. You can get additional information at our website at the location listed there. So as I said, we were talking about how to get your customers, clients, and employees to return because there is a lot of items that you don't have control over. If you're like most of the small businesses that I know of, you are watching the infection rates very carefully. You're perhaps doing it obsessively. I will frequently check mine, once or twice a day, although the numbers don't change. This particular graph shows our infection rates in Santa Clara County relative to the tier. And as you can see, since mid-March, we've been within 1 percentage point of being in the yellow tier. We've been in the orange since the beginning of March. And I know that we're all hoping that we can get there to a lower rate, but we don't really have any control over that. On the other hand, we do know the regulatory environment. We know we're in orange tier. We know who's allowed to be opened. There are a good many resources out there. And as you can see, Santa Clara is among the most likely to be looking at the regulatory environment and expecting you to be in compliance with it. This figure of nearly $5 million worth of fines looks very significant until you realize that there are really 2 companies that are responsible for the majority of that. And that was a decision that they made. I'm kind of hoping that's not a decision that you as a small business will make, but obviously that's an option. But they knew going into it that they would be subject to fees and fines if they continued to not recognize the regulatory requirements. So that's something that they have and you have control over. There are a good many other regulations that are being laid out pretty well by the county and the state and increasingly at the federal level. You and every other business in your industry can reach the minimal levels of expected safety. But I want to raise the question, which is really, is just having your doors open enough? Which really brings us to the next piece here, which is, even if you have your doors open, is everybody going to feel comfortable coming back? There's a lot of worry out there still. That first quote related to the state allowing certain activities, but indicating that it may not be safe, that's actually put out by the Santa Clara County. So they're cautioning that, yes, you can do this, but it isn't necessarily going to be safe. Meanwhile, in Brazil, there's not much in the way of treatment happening with regard to vaccinations. And as a result, Brazil appears to be brewing, as they indicate in this quote, new variants. And other issues that many people are concerned about is that the vaccines, while very effective, don't solve the problems for everyone. Now, keep in mind that that 6,000 number feels like a very large number, but in fact, actually, with the millions of people who've been vaccinated, it's quite small. Still, the reality is your customers and your employees may be very cautious about returning to your business to do business with you or to work for you. And I think that those are things that you and presumably you as people who are attending this workshop are also cognizant of as well. So today's panelists will get into the meat of that. Pam Vavra from SCORE will talk about it from the business perspective, what types of things can be done on the business level that will allow people to, or those businesses to stand out relative to just the minimum levels of requirement that are in the regulations. How can you be more competitive? Greg Torrico is with Start Small, Think Big, and she is joined by Ed Langhammer Jr. From Cozen and O'Connor, where he's an attorney, and they will address some of the legal issues and limitations that you have in terms of being able to bring back those various groups. So with that, I will stop sharing the screen and invite Pam to share her presentation in which she will be talking about it from the business perspective. And it looks as though if she clicks there we go, we should be up and running.
All right, thank you very much, Des, and thank you everybody for being here. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to address you and tell you a little bit about how SCORE might be able to assist you in getting back to business. As some of you may know, but I'll review very quickly, SCORE was formed back in 1964. At that time, the Small Business Administration was making loans to small businesses, and their default rate was at like 85%. So SCORE was formed as a way to assist small business owners to learn the ropes from experienced volunteer executives. Since then, we've helped over 11 million people pursue their business goals. Our mission is simple. It's simply to foster vibrant small business, communities by mentoring and education. We in our vision, everybody will have the support that they need to be successful. The ways we help our small business community is by providing free, unlimited business advice and mentoring. Free as in free. We also offer low cost or no cost business training in the form of webinars, seminars, and hopefully soon to be resumed in-person workshops. And then we have quite a number of free online resources, templates, and whatnot that you might find useful. Today, we're going to talk about tips for reopening your business. And my name is Pam Vavra, and I've decided to speak a little more slowly because I remembered that the interpreters may have a difficult time translating. But I've been with Silicon Valley SCORE for almost 5 years now, and I'm also an attorney. but I'm not practicing as an attorney today. SCORE is not permitted to give legal advice. So we tend to refer people to places such as Start Small, Think Big. We also have relationships with both Santa Clara Law School and Lincoln Law School, where they offer free legal advising to business owners and entrepreneurs. So I want to start by talking about what are people's expectations when we try to return. And I can back a lot of this up with real live data that shows that when we return to normal, it's not going to be normal. There are going to be some major lasting changes in the way businesses are run, and particularly in the mind of customers and employees. The businesses that are going to survive will be those that can muster the flexibility and adaptability so that they can respond to these new and evolving needs of both, again, consumers, employees, and customers. In my opinion, if you keep your focus primarily centered on the health and the safety of your employees and your customers, I think all else will follow. In preparing for this talk, I read a recent article by Forbes in which they looked at the customer mindset. And you know, just as when you started your business and you began to think about what problem am I trying to solve with this business idea, you were urged probably to get into the mindset of your customer. And that's just the same thing that we're doing today. Some of the things that Forbes talked about in their article were some surveys that were done that show that 71% of those surveyed said that if they perceive that a brand is putting profit over people, then they're going to lose trust in that brand forever. And this is a new demand coming to light. 30% say they're going to shop online more. 36% of those working from home say that they'd like to continue to do so. And over a third strongly agree that they will reappraise their values and not take things for granted as much anymore. So this is why historians who looked at the changes that came about due to the Black Plague and other earlier pandemics and wars will tell you that this is going to change our life forever. But you will survive if you keep your eye on two main things, and you'll see this as a repeated theme. One is planning. If you establish plans and contingencies and have set plans and policies in place, and you help interact with your customers, employees in a way that gives you confidence and is consistent, if you comply strictly with federal, state, and local regulations and guidelines, and if you have a plan for how to respond if somebody tests positive, or how to respond to an employee or a customer who refuses to comply, then those are the kinds of things that we recommend that you do. You spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's why we're here today, and that's why SCORE is available to help you. Similarly, communication and messaging, just again, as I said, with earning the trust of your initial customers, the way you convey your message needs to be, clear and consistent. You want to consider having signage that spells out not just your open hours, but also your expectations of your customers as well as your employees. And it's important, based on the survey data that I showed you, to set the right tone. Make sure that your tone is one of compassion, kindness, and people-centered. And you want to use all forms that you can, including digital media, to get that message out there that you are open, ready for business, and that you care about your customers and employees, and you look forward to them returning. We tend to give people not just the explicit advice, but rather lead people to resources. The Chamber of Commerce is an excellent resource. They've come out with some very good guidelines recently. So I urge you to take advantage of those. And all of these links will be in my slide deck that'll be available to you, as well as some other attachments. We recommend that you always look for the horse's mouth when it comes to regulations and laws that you need to be in compliance with. And I mentioned a couple here, but I'm sure that Ed's going to be touching on a lot more. When it comes to financial resources, there are 5 main ones that you may already be familiar with. And we're not talking about financial relief or resources today, but just so you know, the 5 main ones are the SBA, the IRS, the State of California, County of Santa Clara, and City of San Jose. Now, at SCORE, we have quite a number of resources that have just been developed, and particularly we have step-by-step guides and checklists for reopening your business, whether it's a retail business, a restaurant business, or anything in between. And if there's time, I don't know, Des, you're going to clue me on when I'm getting close to time. But if there is time, I'll show you a couple of those. But my key takeaways that I hope you will get from this is, first, is to look at expectations. There's no return to normal. It's not going to be the same. And you will succeed if you are consistent in planning with policies and procedures that are clear, understandable. If you are flexible and do continuous assessment and communication about what it is you're trying to accomplish, you'll be successful. Stay in compliance. Focus on health and safety, stick to consistent and clear messaging guidelines that you're probably already very familiar with. But again, SCORE and others are available to help, and there are lots of resources out there to help you as well. So this is my contact information, and more generally, Silicon Valley SCORE is available to help you. And Des, do I have 1 more minute that I can look at these resources that I mentioned?
Why don't you take another 5 minutes and pick out your favorites within that and show them off.
Great, thank you. So I think that's it. All right, so here's a number of resources that I have put together that, again, I'll put the links to. First of all, here is our SCORE brochure that I'll include in our packet. This was a great resource that I found, again, stressing the same things: communication and creating a plan. So those are the keys. This is the article by Forbes that I mentioned with the survey information. And then the main thing that I really liked is this, that is available on our SCORE resource, a complete template for how to assess and do all the things you need to reopen confidently. Action plans, specific action plans and guides, and then checklists. And this one happens to be, I think, for retail, and then there's one for restaurants as well. All right, any questions?
We'll return to questions at the end. Okay. How's that sound?
Right.
All right. Wonderful, Pam. You guys are such a tremendous resource, and I know that that SCORE was one of the founding members of businessownerspace.com, and really your leadership in that area in connecting people up with counselors at no cost to those businesses has been really instrumental in a lot of people doing well, particularly during this time. And the fact that other organizations like Start Small, Think Big, or the SBDC have also participated has been a tremendous help in terms of being able to make sure that people are able to connect up with the resources they need. So again, thank you, Pam. Thank you, SCORE, all your colleagues in making that possible. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce Gray Tarico. She is our local representative at Start Small, Think Big, another businessownerspace.com partner. In her case, well, she'll talk to you about the offerings that they bring to the table, but they include the legal assistance that and not advice, but guidance that you'll be hearing today.
Thanks, Des. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, Pam. Thank you so much. It's always nice to have really amazing peers to work with in the ecosystem. So my name's Gray, she, her. I work as the Community Engagement Manager for Start Small, Think Big. We are a nonprofit. We have different locations. I'll get into that in a minute, but it's really nice to always just kind of in awe of all of the ways that community partners show up for a community. The tremendous shift that we saw last year with the pandemic. Also want to shout out the interpreters for being here as well. And I will do my best to be a slow speaker. I tend to talk fast, so I'll do my best here. So a little bit about who we are. We are a nonprofit, like I said. We have historically been based in New York City for the last 10 years. But we have offices in Oakland and in San Jose, physical offices. And what we do is really try to connect Black, Indigenous, people of color, business owners to high quality legal, financial, and marketing services. And so that is really our main mission, really wanting to provide support to business owners, making sure that they are connected to top high quality experts in all of these different facets of our work. So it's exciting to be here and share a little bit more about the ways that we can potentially support you in your business. So what does that look like? We do, we tend to overlap at times with other great service providers, and honestly, the demand continues to be high. So we come from it from a perspective of being extremely collaborative. There will always be need. There will always be need. And so the ways that we can show up for our community members is really what it's about right now. We are unique in that one of the ways that we tend to fill gaps in community is through the legal program. So I'll focus on that specifically today because I think it's relevant to our topic at hand, but definitely reach out if you're interested in the other two programs. So the legal component of our program is like this. We work to connect you to free legal assistance by way of attorneys. So actually, it's a great way to, in the future, segue to Ed. Ed is actually from Cozen O'Connor, and a firm that we work with among the many firms that we work with. So the idea here is that folks like Ed within their firms are deeply invested in wanting to see small businesses thrive and want to support through giving time in way of pro bono hours. And so we work to connect our clients with these firms. We do different types of work within that. These are some of the ways that shows up. So we do technical assistance. We try to make sure that, for example, for small businesses are looking to think more about their entity selection, we get them connected to attorneys that do that. So if you are a sole prop, you want to move into an LLC, we can get you connected to make sure that happens. You've got a contract that you want reviewed, we can make that happen. So those are some ways that shows up. Another one is lease. You've got a lease, which is a huge one right now. You want that reviewed. You want to figure out what are ways that you can, think about negotiating with your landlord, or what are some avenues that you have. We can get that reviewed by an attorney. So those are some tangible ways that we are supporting small businesses. And so definitely, please feel free to reach out after the presentation, and we're happy to connect. So a couple of things on how to actually, again, get this free service. We basically, allow a full year of services for clients. So to become a client, I'll share the link for the application in a few, but there are some eligibility requirements. And these are the top two. Right now, location is not an issue. So if you are in any part of California, you would qualify in terms of location. And these are the other two requirements that we would look at. One is eligibility based on business stage and size. So we generally, our wheelhouse is working with operational businesses. So if you're about to launch a business, amazing for you. We can connect you to service providers that do that work way better than we do. But if you're already in business, you are actively selling in the last 3 months. I'll say a caveat in a minute there about that, but you've got 3 months of sales, 500 or more. We can get you connected. You've meet the sales requirement there. If you are a business that is still about to reopen, you've had the pandemic to deal with, but you've got pre-COVID sales, you got something before March 2020, you would still qualify if you got $500 or more. In terms of financial income, we're looking at under-resourced business owners. So we're looking generally at household income that is less than 500% of the federal poverty guidelines. So that's just something to think about. And in terms of our application, this is what that looks like. I'll share it in my, at the end of my presentation. The application is fairly simple. It won't take more than 10-15 minutes to fill out. You can also self-identify. Everything that I've just talked about is actually on the application, so no need to take notes. And you can see exactly what you would be looking at. So we're not hiding the ball here. This is all that you would need to become one of our clients. So say that you do qualify, then you get these services for free. So I'll be brief here. We do have a rapid response program, which is separate from the client model that I just talked about. Again, this is just specific related to getting new information, consultations with attorneys related to any legal or financial assistance that you need because of the pandemic. And so just something to think about, but we're moving into recovery. So we're seeing a decrease in this, but regardless, something for you to think about. All of these links are in my PowerPoint presentation that Des does have that he can share after the webinar. So don't hurry and take notes. It's all good. We will get this to you in full so that you have it. So again, it's been so nice to have a brief chat with all of you. If you do need or questions after today, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to support anybody who has more questions about it. So with that, I would love to pass the mic to our great partner here, Ed. Ed Langhammer has done this. I don't know, Ed. I mean, it's been like a couple times now. I feel like I've done this with you. It seems like it's just been forever, honestly.
We've been here before.
We've been here before. We've been here before. It's really nice to have Ed back. He's got a wealth of experience and knowledge, and so I'll let him do a little bit deeper dive on his introduction, but it's nice to have you here, Ed. So I'll let you take it away from here.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's staying safe as can be. And a little bit of luck, I've just shared my screen. Des, thank you. You're nodding your head yes. I assume that means I'm good to go. Absolutely. Well, hopefully everybody's staying safe, staying well. Pam, Gray, Des, thank you so much for all the great information that you've provided. I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for a long time. And I will say just right off the bat that out of all the time I've been practicing, never have we seen so many changes on so many levels happening all at once. And I joke sometimes that we have to write this stuff down on a chalkboard because everything changes so much. The guidance changes a lot. The rules change a lot. We're continuing to evolve. People are dealing with stuff that's unprecedented and certainly in our lifetimes. So welcome everybody. I hope to give you some information. That again, we're going to give you general advice. We're not forming an attorney-client relationship. Enough said about that. This is about my law firm, and Gray, thank you for your kind words. We've been around for a long time. We have a lot of lawyers in a lot of different places, and we have resources that are available. That's me. So here's today's topics, and we're going to really blow through many of these quickly because, and I'm going to slow myself down. I know because we have interpreters, and thank you interpreters for doing this for us. But we're going to talk a little bit about reopening California, rolling forward on reopening with COVID-19's ever-changing guidance. We'll talk about Cal-OSHA prevention program, which is new. We're going to talk just in passing about the Northern California counties, just to make you aware of some of the issues. But Des has already done a great job of highlighting those. We're going to talk about Department of Industrial Relations guidance for safe reopening. We're going to talk about vaccinations. We're going to talk about the hot ticket issue, something that's burning up the news media and everybody's fascinated with, which is vaccination passports. We'll talk a little bit about medical certifications for returning employees, new California sick pay laws, employee leaves, including a brand new law under the California Family Rights Act that for the first time ever applies to small companies with as few as 5 employees. This is a monumental shift in California. We're also going to talk about some notice and reporting obligations for employers, workers' compensation presumptions, some new-ish laws that our governor has done, and then an EEOC update. So Reopening California did a great job already of covering this. And by the way, we're going to make all these slides available to you. You'll have the presentation. Don't struggle to take notes, as Greya said before. You'll make it available. You have it available. We have other things we can provide to you. So sit back, relax, and just enjoy the show. But the blueprint for a safer economy, we're still living under this. And as we know, it established that 4-tier framework, and we had 4 colors. We know now, yay, that we are now into the orange color, which is moderate. And I'll just show you one chart. All of this is online, but it just shows the first page of a 5-page form that essentially talks about what happens when we're in the various tiers. So we've been living in all of the other tiers, the purple and the red. Now we're living in the orange. So, and hopefully we'll be living in the yellow soon. So again, we just want to make sure that's just kind of the baseline for where we begin. And we know the counties have to stay in the current tier for a minimum of 3 weeks. They got to meet certain criteria. They have to establish certain things that they need to do. We know that they can move backwards and forwards. We've seen that happen. So that's still where we're at right now, what we're operating under. There's a number of sort of comparatives, and Des did a great job already. I'm going to skip these because this is just the historical place of where we've been. And what's exciting, I'm so excited I went past one slide, is we now see as of the 13th, 2 days ago, the metrics are still moving in the right direction. And we see so many things that are happening and so many good changes. And we know now that, the latest information as of today, which is when the website was updated, California's got that June 15th reopening date. We'll see, keep your fingers crossed, keep your toes crossed. Hopefully we'll all be doing it. The majority of the counties are orange, that's great, but, and this applies to employment. Keeping your customers safe, keeping yourself safe is the main thing. Is we still have a mask mandate. We have a statewide mask mandate. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we know the schools are beginning to reopen. And again, schools reopening presents challenges for those of you who have employees, because now their children need to make sure that they're ready to go back to school, and they can arrange for those things. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Rolling forward on reopening, timeline. These are some of the things we're going to talk about. December 1, we had Cal-OSHA, which is the agency that regulates safety in the workplace. Primary concern, safety primarily for employees. But I think Pam said it brilliantly. What's safe for your employees is going to hopefully also be safe for you, and also going to be safe for your customers. So the mindset is safety. There's the new notice reporting obligations for COVID, which kicked in on January 1. The blueprint for a safer economy was March 16th, and then various Northern California county and state guidances. I practice in Southern California. I practice in Los Angeles. So so things are very similar in many ways and different in many ways. So what I will tell you is that always check, and I'll say it repeatedly, Pam has said it, Des has said it, go to the websites early and often. The stuff keeps changing, so keep looking. But what are we doing on the blueprint? Where are we now? Well, it's all about vaccinations, the vaccine equity metrics. We have goals stated, we've got number of cases, number of shots. We know these numbers are all getting good. Reducing COVID-19, keeping California moving towards reopening, moving through the tiers. There's a small county framework, there's risk criteria, there's information with respect to schools. Again, the goal, keeping it safe, reopening. So let's talk about nuts and bolts. OSHA, the agency that regulates workplace safety. This is something that applies to all companies, whether you're a big company, whether you're a small company, whether you're a mega big company. All employers now are required to have a written COVID-19 prevention plan. And you have to address the specific requirements in your specific workplace. So what does that mean? Well, it means one big thing, which is OSHA has long required that employees have a written document called an Injury and Illness Prevention Plan. That's not new. I mention it because in OSHA's mind, the component of the COVID prevention program, the CPP, is just one more component of a workplace safety plan. And depending on what type of a business you are, you may already have some of those elements in place. But the couple of big things that I always mention, because under this guidance, one of the things you have to do as an employer is you have to maintain an employee's earnings and benefits if those employees are quarantined or subject to an isolation order, unless you can demonstrate that if the employee has COVID, it's not work related. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a different context, but again, that's a big requirement on companies, and it ties into some of the other requirements on companies. Employers can't require a COVID test before allowing employees to return to the workplace after quarantine. And there's new requirements for face coverings. And this is just a further summary of some of the coverage points. Indoor, outdoor mask mandates. Employers have to provide face coverings. We'll talk about that a little bit more. That hasn't gone away yet, folks. We still have it. We're still living with it. You have to make sure that masks are worn by the workers who are indoor and outdoor workers who are less than 6 feet from each other. The 6 feet rule hasn't gone away. You have to separate workers by 6 feet. If you have a company where it's required, you have to install ventilators, air filters, do other things for safety. You have to explain to your employees, and this is critical, you have to tell them what your expectations are. Tell them what you're going to do to keep them safe. And also you have to explain policies if an employee has to miss time from work without penalties if they're infected or if they're suspected of being infected. And of course, the old rule hasn't gone away. If you're sick, stay away from the workplace. Don't come to work. Don't show up if you're sick. It applies, this new standard applies to all employees, places of employment, unless you have only one employee and you don't have contact with any other people, which would include customers and clients, if you're working from home. And if you're already covered by OSHA's aerosol transmission standard, which I am not even going to try to get into, this is supposed to be 6 months. But we've seen these rules once they start, depending on what's happening with the boots on the ground, what's really happening in the world and in our state, some of these things are likely to be expanded. So what else does this cover? Well, you've got to talk to your employees again about your prevention program. It can't be a secret. You've got to do the physical distancing I mentioned. You've got to use face coverings, which I've mentioned. You got to use engineering controls if they apply to your specific business, and you've got to have a procedure to respond to COVID in the workplace. It's still there. People are still getting sick. It hasn't gone away. And then you've got to provide training for your employees. So if there's an exposure in the workplace, you've got to be able to make sure employees are provided testing. And again, if there's COVID cases and exposed employees in the workplace, they have to be excused from the workplace until they're no longer at risk of infection. You've got to keep records for OSHA. That's the other thing. Whatever you're doing should be documented. And by the way, you know, the website OSHA has a model prevention plan. It's a terrific resource for folks. Contact tracing, I only left this slide in because this is also part of a company's investigation, and you can go back and look at it, but it's part of an employer's responsibility if there's an outbreak in your workplace to make sure that you're doing some contact tracing to figure out the likely source. Northern California guidance does get a great job of introducing it to you. Again, the only thing I can say about it is this stuff is changing quickly. Go to the websites. If whatever county you're in, check the county, check the guidance early and often. And by the way, check also the city guidance. City of San Jose has some special things out there. But one, LA City also does. So check it. The laws are continuing to evolve. LA County Safer at Work, I'm only mentioning it. I'm not going to spend time talking about it because I don't think any of you are from Los Angeles, but it's just illustrative of the types of things that counties are doing to keep people safe, to keep them safe in the community, to keep them safe at work. So I'm not going to spend time talking about it, but if any of you have specific questions on that, you can take a look at these slides. We'll make them available. And then after that, if you have questions, you can reach out. You can reach out through Gray. You can reach out through to me. So let's talk now about the Department of Industrial Relations safe opening FAQs, because a lot of these questions come up with respect to the FAQs. Again, I know I sound a little bit like a broken record at this point. Employers have an obligation to keep employees safe. By implication, you've got some obligations to try to keep your customers safe. They're not mutually exclusive. COVID doesn't discriminate as between whether you're a customer or a client or whether you're an employee. It doesn't respect those rules. But again, face coverings, medical checks, returning to the work site, liability waivers. Those are just a couple of things we're going to talk about because it happens people ask these questions all the time. Go back one. So does a company have to pay for face coverings if their employees are required to have them at work? Short answer, yes. We're required as California employers to provide at no cost to employees face coverings. It may also involve a face shield, depending on the workplace. You can't charge your workers for it, even if you let them wear them as a marketing piece or for whatever other reason during the period of time when they're not working. Think of it like a uniform. You have to pay for a uniform if you want your employees to wear a uniform. Face coverings, even more essential. It's part of it. It's a safety equipment. Medical checks and reporting time. This comes up all the time because under California, if you have an employee who is non-exempt, meaning they work for an hourly wage, they're not, they're entitled to meal breaks, rest breaks, overtime if they work over 8 hours a day. The vast majority of workers are in that non-exempt bucket. So if you have a non-exempt employee perform some sort of a medical check, do you have to pay the employee for the time that employee spends to do that medical check? Short answer. There's always a longer answer, but today we're doing the short answers. Yes, you do. If you require them to do the medical check, then you are required to compensate them for all time work. And that's even could be just a few minutes. We don't have a thing in California called a de minimis rule, where if I ask you to work 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes over, that I may not have to pay you for it. In California, we don't have that. So you really need to pay people. It's the fair thing to do. It's the proper thing to do. It's promoting of the safety of the company. And by the way, I represent employers. I represent companies. I've been representing companies forever. And so when I talk about things like fair and what's important to do for companies, it's another way of saying avoiding liability, avoiding the risk of exposure. And that's why I say it, because sometimes the law doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But in other ways, the law makes perfectly good sense and promotes safety and helps the company and helps its employees. It's also a smart thing to do. So if an employee performs a medical check on site before the start of my, before a shift, do I have to pay that employee for the time they spend doing that medical check? They show up 5-10 minutes early. Generally, yes. Under the law, if they report for work, and even if they're later sent home, and that's really what this question assumes, is that they have a temperature check and they fail the test and now they test high. And if you have to send them home, then they may be entitled to pay for half of the hours that they would have worked. So that's another wrinkle on this. So you may not have to pay them if they're scheduled to work for 8 hours. You may not have to pay them for 8 hours, but you'll have to pay them for 4 hours. If they're scheduled for 4 hours, you may have to pay them for 2 hours. Self-screening at home. It's another big question that comes up. And do you have to pay an employee who performs medical checks like a temperature check at home? Well, you know, yes, in some cases. It's a little bit more murky because it really does depend, you know, on the circumstances. And, you know, we always say the facts determine the circumstances, and the law applies to all of that. So it depends, but, you know, if ever in doubt, you err on the side of caution. But there may be circumstances where you don't. If you're not exercising control over the workers, for example, then there's a question on whether you have to compensate. If you, on the other hand, require or mandate that employees take and record their temperatures, now they're recording it, so it's a little more complicated. Then the rule is probably going to be they need to be compensated for that. So again, depending on what you're doing in your workplace, there can be exposure. My job today is just to point out that there could be an exposure with respect to the wage and hour laws. So what do you need to do? What does a company need to do to protect the employee and the co-workers if someone working at the work site tests positive? Well, you're supposed to follow the guidelines. The Center for Disease and Public Health, employer guidelines are out there, the CDC guidance is out there, there's a lot of guidance out there. So, and if there's a workplace outbreak, it needs to be dealt with. But the main thing is if employees do get sick and are sick, then they should stay home, they should stay away. And then there is reporting obligations. If there's a serious illness or death, Cal OSHA requires that be reported. And that's not new law. It's been around for a long time. And so you have to consider whether you're going to test employees if there's an outbreak, if you need it for identification. Testing we'll talk about a little bit more. It's still a little bit of a slippery slope, and I'll talk about that. So can we tell people not to come to work if they're symptomatic or they've been exposed? Yes. If employees have symptoms or become sick, they should be excluded from the workplace, and there's guidance for that. Paid leave, I'm talking about this because some are specific to the size of your business, and candidly, some of you who are working on starting your dream and starting your own business may actually be somebody else's employee. So I do this just to raise awareness to just the smorgasbord, if you will, of benefits that are available. So what do we have? Just real quick, we have the benefits under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA. Now, there's 3 pieces to that. One piece was the original version that ended on December 31 of 2020, and it provided benefits if an employee needed to take time off because the employee was sick, and also provided benefits if the employee needed time to care for a family member or a child. So that benefit was mandatory on employers with less than 500 employees through the end of December of last year. Congress by law expanded it for an additional 90 days. So that law became not mandatory, but voluntary for companies. And if companies provided that benefit for an additional 90 days, they would be entitled to tax credits. Way too complicated for this, but that's just the second piece of it. The third piece, under the new ARPA, the American Response Recovery Act that was just passed under the Biden administration, that has now been expanded from April 1 through September 30th. And it's a whole new restart. So I'm only raising it to let you know that it's out there in case you hear about it. So there's also California Supplemental Paid Sick Leave. The original program ended on December 30th of last year. But, and we'll talk about it, there was a new version of the law that passed at the end of March. And we're going to talk about that, so I won't say anything else about it now. And that new law applies if you have 26 or more employees. So those of you that are under that magic number of 26, you need to sit back and relax. But if you have 26 or more, sadly, you'll have to pay attention. There's also the regular sick leave program. Don't forget, this is not old, this is not new, this is old. This is, you have to provide employees generally 3 days, up to 3 days of paid sick pay. That's not new, that's old. I'm mentioning it only because we have to remember when we're talking about benefits, that's another benefit that employees can be entitled to. Same thing with local paid sick leave laws. A lot of cities and counties implemented those. Some of them have expired. Some of them have continued. I think the city of San Jose has a continuation of it on some level. But you have to be mindful of those laws as well. Because A, if you're an employee, they'll provide benefits for you, possibly. And B, if you're an employer, you may be responsible for it. And there's a great chart. Again, we're going to make the slide available to you, which is posted online, which is periodically updated. And then also you have to, and I mentioned this before, just under regular wage hour rules, wage and hour rules, you have to pay employees for time they work. And it's called reporting time pay. So other things that are benefits that employees can be eligible for, disability insurance, not new. Disability insurance, if you get disabled, you can't work because of a non-work related reason, you may be entitled to disability insurance. Unemployment insurance, if you can't work because you become unemployed, you may be entitled to unemployment insurance. There's pandemic employment assistance for business owners. Some of these may have sunsetted, some of them may be renewed or in the process of being renewed. And don't forget, there's paid family leave. That's not new, that's been around. So if you need to care for a quarantine, a child or a family member, then you can get up to 8 weeks of partial pay, which is paid by the state of California. It was recently changed from 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And so again, the benefit structures, they're confusing, they're overlapping, they're changing, and last but not least, there's a fraud alert. There's, with all of this stuff, there's been a tremendous amount of abuse and fraud in the application process and the procurement process. And we've heard about what's happened at the EDD with respect to people making claims when they weren't eligible for claims. So liability waivers, people ask about this. Can I make my employee sign a waiver of liability if they get sick with COVID in the workplace? Short answer, no. And the reason for that is it's just contrary to public policy. If for no other reason than under the law, if an employee gets sick because of something that happens in the workplace arising out of or in the course and scope of work, the employee is entitled to be compensated for that under the workers' compensation laws. And even if you're a small company, one employee, you're required to have workers' compensation. So you have to be mindful of that. So if you ask about, if we're asked about liability waivers, I mean, generally, our recommendation is not to think it's a good idea for most companies. Again, check with your own lawyer on that if there's a reason that I'm not aware of that's specific to your business that would be something you want to do. Vaccines, okay. Here's the big, one of the big issues that's been coming up, and it leads into what we're really going to talk about. So we know there's 3 vaccines with emergency use authorizations. We know one of them, J&J, Johnson & Johnson, there's been a pause on that because of some concerns with respect to blood clotting. So there's 2 with emergency use authorization. The emergency use authorization is huge in the context that I'm going to address it in a couple of minutes. The interesting thing, the reality and what the world we're living in is that some folks are jumping the line to get vaccinated. They're going to other counties to get vaccinated. They're chasing vaccination shots and the like. And then on the other hand, you've got this whole bunch of people who are vaccine hesitant or who are adamantly opposed to getting vaccinated. So in your workplace, in your work world, in your personal world, those are issues that we're dealing with because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So I talk about this emergency use authorization because I think that's key. I mean, the issue with respect to the emergency use authorization is that it's conditional use. It's been approved on an emergency basis. And so that creates a certain amount of doubt and uncertainty with respect to individual decisions as to whether or not to get the vaccination. I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be a medical expert, but it comes into my world, you know, in large part because of the nature of the authorizations that these things are being distributed under. We know that the CDC has a recommended phase. Right now we know, I mean, LA County, I think all of California, we know 16 and overs can now get vaccinated. So we're moving along on that front. So guidelines, where do we look to? Who do we talk to? There's a number of different agencies and they've weighed in differently to some extent on the issue of vaccinations. They weighed in differently on issues with respect to testing, and now we've got vaccination. So the EEOC has the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission applies to, it's a federal law, it applies generally to companies that have 15 or more employees. California laws with respect to discrimination generally apply to companies with 5 or more employees, so that's really small. And then harassment laws apply if you have only 1 employee, and other laws, for example, wage and hour laws, apply if you have just 1 employee. So one of the things you have to be, the big picture on this is we have to be mindful about information we get from employees because it invades their rights to privacy, it invades their medical privacy, and there's certain rules that apply. And one of them is actually, this implicates laws under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the California counterpart to that, the Rehabilitation Act, the Genetic Information Act, and Title VII, which is the sort of the grandparent of the civil rights laws. And so, but these laws are not supposed to affect people's rights to follow, or employers' rights to follow CDC guidance. So is a vaccination a medical exam? Big question, great question. And so the short answer is no. Because why does this matter? Well, it's because under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you can't require a medical examination and you can't make inquiries about somebody's health condition or what their medical condition might be. And under California law, pretty much the same. You know, people have rights to privacy. Just because they get a paycheck doesn't mean they give up all of their rights to privacy. So the big exception is if something is job related and it's consistent with business necessity, then you're allowed a wider opportunity to get information. And before I'll say that, I'm going to say one other thing, which is about information you ask for employees to give you. Be mindful of what you're asking for, because sometimes you get more information than you need. And sometimes there'll be a TMI moment where you'll now get information from an employee that candidly now you have to deal with that you may not have had to deal with. So I always say this in a lot of different contexts. If you want information, why do you want it? What are you going to do with it? And how are we prepared to deal with it if you wind up with getting information that creates another workplace issue for you? So can an employee, having said all that, we're back to vaccinations. So what about inquiries about vaccinations? Can I ask or require an employee to provide a proof of vaccination? Now, is that a disability-related inquiry? So short answer is no, if that's as far as you go. And by the way, I think in California, I'm not convinced the answer is no. I think the answer is, perhaps it may be. But so there's a lot of reasons why an employer can ask, and they're legitimate business reasons. But you have to be mindful you're not asking for other medical information. And again, it has to be job related. It has to be consistent with business necessity. You can't just ask because you want to ask. And if you're the owner of a business or you're the manager of a business, it's wise to avoid water cooler talk. Because in my world, a lot of people come up to you and say, hey, have you gotten vaccinated yet? I mean, that when you're talking to one of your employees could be an inquiry which could be not necessarily allowable, I'll say it that way. So with respect to employees, can workers refuse a vaccination based on health concerns? It's a big issue. We already know it's what's going on in the world. So there's exceptions. Under the law, we're going to use the Americans with Disabilities Act to talk about it. California law is the same. If someone says they've got a health concern with respect to the vaccine, then you have to have an interactive discussion with them. And you've got to determine the extent to which you may be able to provide what's called reasonable accommodation. It doesn't mean any accommodation, but it means what's reasonable for the company. And you have to show if they're not vaccinated that that's going to pose a direct threat in your workplace, or it's going to cause an undue burden on your business. And those are easy to say, they're difficult burdens of proof for companies. And you also, if such an event happens and somebody needs an accommodation, you have to consider other options, work at home options, moving them to a segregated area, wearing personal protective equipment. And this may be difficult based on how your business is situated. What about religious accommodation? That's the other big one. Can I refuse a vaccination based on religious beliefs? Short answer is an employer has to provide an accommodation for an employee's sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance, unless it will impose an undue hardship. Within what I just said are 1,000 sub-questions, which is what's a religion, the extent of a religion, what's a sincerely held belief, way beyond the scope of this. But you have to be mindful of it. And the second piece is if you can't provide an accommodation, you really do need to be able to justify what the undue hardship would be for your business, and whether or not you can exclude the employee from the workplace. What the EEOC says, you can't have a knee-jerk reaction to automatically terminate somebody who won't get vaccinated. So you have to be mindful of that because we're having those issues right now come up in our workplaces. So can you mandate an employee to get a vaccination? Can I just have a company-wide policy that says, everyone's going to get vaccinated? Well, it's not one size fits all. And it's a complicated question and it's tied up in for a lot of different reasons. Some of them I've already talked about. But there's a difference between having an employee get vaccinated simply in order to come to work or continue to work versus, actually returning to the office if they're going to travel on work-related business, if they're going to meet with customers. And again, because these vaccinations only have emergency use authorizations, patients and your employees need to be given a choice as to whether they're going to get it or not. And that's an issue and a concern from all angles. I mean, anyone who's taken the vaccination is taking it with some degree of risk. It's unknown whether it's minimal or not. So the takeaway here is that at this point, employers are likely not going to be able to force employees to get a vaccination. For example, even in front-facing medical industries, healthcare workers, most healthcare companies are not pushing the envelope on that and going to go far as to mandate COVID vaccinations in the workplace. But the EEOC has said you can mandate it, right? I mean, this is what the EEOC has said, you can mandate vaccinations. Well, they didn't really. They just said that it's not necessarily illegal. So they gave us sort of a half answer to it. but they didn't address any state laws, which are equally important. And here in California, federal law is the floor, not the ceiling. California law is far more protective of employees than the federal law is. And again, we already talked about, you had to accommodate religious and medical objections. There could be issues of what's called protected concerted activity. That's an employee's right to complain about the terms of conditions of employment. Emergency use authorization, I sound a little bit like a broken record. And then the emerging area, the emerging thing in the law is now we're having some states, not California, not so far, but prohibiting mandatory vaccination policies. We have bills that are coming up in South Carolina, Florida, Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, Washington, among others. So takeaway is if you are a company that has employees otherwise in other locations in other states, it's not going to be necessarily the same answers. Again, there's open questions still on the impact. We want things to get back to normal, but and employers are saying, well, vaccinations are the best way to get back to normal. It certainly seems to be the consensus, but again, we've talked about some of the issues and concerns. What about wearing PPEs? What about wearing protective equipment, even if you're vaccinated? The answer is yes for now. The short answer is yes for now. Social distancing, even if I'm vaccinated? Short answer for now is yes. What about quarantining if I'm exposed, if I'm vaccinated? I'll talk about that in another slide in a minute, but yeah, the answer is probably perhaps not. But we'll talk about that in a sec. But what about as the virus mutates? We'll be having the same conversations if a booster becomes available, and companies are going to want to know, can we require a booster? Can we require an additional shot? We had this discussion when we talked about testing. We had this discussion with vaccines. We're going to have this discussion with respect to booster shots. It's going to be a recurring theme, and we're going to have various levels of objections and so forth. So what do? Should you mandate? That's a decision for your company, but you've got to consider what's the impact on your employees? What about your workforce? So what's the nature of your workforce? What's the nature of your business? And what about alternatives to mandating it? What about instead of using a stick that you will get vaccinated, what about using an incentive that if you get vaccinated, we're going to offer you some other stuff, additional paid time off, additional education programs, cash, prizes, raffles, awards. Sounds good, right? But here's the problem. Let's say not problem, here's the challenge. Right now, the government agencies haven't given us clear guidance on, can I offer my employees an incentive to get vaccinated? Here's the reasons. One is discrimination. If you give somebody an incentive for taking a vaccine, and you have someone else who doesn't take the vaccine, are you discriminating against the non-vaccine person? If you set an incentive too low, then that's good, because that increases the likelihood that it's truly voluntary. You don't feel coerced. But if it's too low, you may not get employees to buy into it. So if you set it too high, then there's the reverse issue, which is, again, you're discriminating against people who may not get it. So again, also there's wage payment issues everywhere for non-exempt employees. Minimum wage, hours worked if an employee gets a vaccination during work time. Short answer is, if they're going to get it on company time because you encourage companies to get it, they should get paid for that time. And if there's a cost, right now, there's not a cost, but if there were to be a cost, we know that the employer would have to pay the cost of the vaccinations. So other considerations. Okay, do you have current policies in place? With other vaccinations like flu shots, healthcare professionals do, healthcare industries do. What's your industry standard? That's something you need to check. Do your employees come into contact with others or not? Can employees who don't get vaccinated, can they continue to work from home? Again, we talked about incentives, wellness plans, encourage vaccinations. Can you require employees who don't get vaccinated to continue to wear masks? Yes. And the face mask now mandate is even if you're vaccinated. The state of California says still wear a mask. CDC says still wear a mask in some settings. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then if there's a cost of the vaccine, the companies need to pay for it. So again, for just a strategy for companies, you just need to be.
Can I cut in here briefly?
Sure.
This is, I got to say, there's such a wealth of information in here. I'm just being mindful of the time, and we're getting close to 5 o'clock. I wonder if we could take another 5 minutes to cover some of the key questions. That vaccination passport, I know, is one I'm especially interested in hearing about, but I know that there are a lot of good points within the presentation. Meanwhile, I'd like to invite the attendees to put questions in the Q&A area. If you have questions that you haven't heard the answer to, in the event that we don't get a lot of Q&A kinds of things, I'll invite Ed to continue the discussion on additional items. But I just want to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity to ask those questions if they have them.
Super. Yeah, and I apologize. It's a wealth of information.
It really is.
And we are going to make the slides available, folks. So don't panic. But let me do this, because I know let me just talk about, we've got some new stuff that I mentioned that I want to make sure you're aware of, because this really is stuff that's hot off the press. And Des, if there are questions, then we can take them. I'll take a few more minutes and wrap up, and then we can circle back to questions, and hopefully we'll get into some good ones. So there's a new paid sick leave law that I just mentioned related to COVID. And now that applies if you have 26 or more employees. And again, this is very new for us because we didn't have this last year. But employees can get up to $511 per day in benefits, up to a $5,110 max. And employers, the carrot for employers is they can get some payroll tax credits for what they pay for their employees. So it's a tax credit off of their taxes that they'd have to pay. So there's some special rules with respect to, the law was passed at the end of March, but they made it retroactive to January 1. So there's this issue of retroactivity for that period of time, and you may have to go back and make adjustments. And then the new thing on that is it includes vaccinations. So again, we have another carrot. If employees have a vaccination and then have to take time off to get vaccinated, then they're entitled to be paid for that under this law. If they get vaccinated and they have a reaction, meaning they get sick, they're entitled to be paid for that. And if they think they have the virus, they have to care for a family member, whatever it is, then they get, they should get paid for that. So if you're 26 or more employees, be mindful of the new law. The thing that's going to apply to a lot of you, if you have 5 or more employees, is this expansion of the California Family Rights Act. I'm not going to talk about it very long, but the issue is it's unpaid leave. For the very first time now, companies, if they have 5 or more employees within certain requirements, but they can get up to, employees can now get up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. And that's huge, because a lot of small companies can't necessarily afford, or don't want to afford, to give employees 12 weeks off. Even though you don't have to pay them for it, it still could be a burden on companies. But I do want to make you aware of that. The devil is in the details. It's just passed. It's hot off the press, and and you do need to be mindful of that if you have 5 or more employees. And then there's workers' compensation. Not workers' compensation, but there's new notice requirements that apply to all employees. And we talked about this a little bit, but you got to give notice to your employees if there's an outbreak in the workplace. People are still getting sick. We know that. And Cal OSHA's authority has been expanded some. And Cal OSHA will cite you if you don't comply with this. Des mentioned when county leads the way in fines, but there's certain requirements that you have to be mindful of. And if you'll get a chance to look at these slides, you can deal with it. The other thing, and I'll probably end here, is workers' compensation presumptions. the law changed a little bit. So it creates a presumption that if you have an illness or death from COVID, then it's risen in the course and scope of your workplace. And the presumption is rebuttable, meaning that you're going to challenge it. But here's the takeaway. You've got only a real small amount of time to challenge it. It's 30 days from the time you get notice of the claim. So you need to report it to your workers' compensation carrier quickly. And there's certain presumptions that apply and timelines that are going to be in the slide. Final point, if you have independent contractors, be very careful. The law changed with respect to independent contractors. In California, it's wickedly hard to have somebody be a bona fide independent contractor. And so with that, I'll just point out one more thing, which is our firm developed a model toolkit for COVID resources. We have a website. We've got a coronavirus task force. So if any of you need additional information, you go to our website. There's a ton of information, along with information from all the other great information that Gray talked about, that Pam talked about, that Des talked about. The good news is a lot of information out there. The bad news is there's a whole lot of information out there. And with that, I'm going to thank you for your attention. And there's my contact information. And yeah, Des, if we have some questions for me or for Gray or for Pam or for you, I'm ready. You're muted.
My mouth is moving and no one can hear me. Sorry about that. And thank you so much. And you did that whole thing on one glug of water. I am very impressed. That was a lot to cover within that narrow space of time. Really appreciate the attention to detail that you've given, and really the wealth of information. In many ways, it's incumbent upon an entrepreneur to know about it, but it's so difficult to keep track of things as quickly as things are changing. And so your insights there are really well valued. One of the questions we got was, what would be an appropriate way to ask someone if they have been vaccinated or if they intend to? Is there a nice general soft way which doesn't suck you into a lot of complications?
Yeah, there's no soft way. And we are talking with respect to vaccinations, right?
Yes, that was
right.
Have they been vaccinated, or do they intend to get vaccinated?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, a lot of companies are just not asking. But on the subject of too much information, I don't know about those of you in the audience. My experience is that when folks get that first jab, I mean, they're posting on social media, they're talking about it, they're disclosing it on their own, and there's nothing wrong with self-disclosure. So yeah, so if employees disclose it on their own, you don't have an issue. But as far as asking about if they've been vaccinated, I think the short answer is you can probably do it, but you've got to be careful. That is very limited to not anything else other than, have you been vaccinated? And you have to be very careful about that, because employees can push back. Some employees think they have a right to privacy, whether they're vaccinated or not. So it's a tough question. I'm really hoping we're going to get some guidance, by the way, from our agencies. Right now, they've just not bit the bullet and told us what we can do. We'd be so much better off if they actually did tell us.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated issue, and they may be worried about wading in as well. One area that I've noticed that the state government has not been shy about wading in is in the vaccine passports. So if you're holding an event, you can actually, according to the state, you can provide additional space for people. You can squeeze them in, you can pack them in, because they've been vaccinated and they've demonstrated to you as a business that they have in fact been vaccinated or have a negative test. I see in what I got the early release of your presentation, and you have a little bit of ambiguity there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it is ambiguous, and I wish again that we would get clear guidance. I mean, what we know at this moment in time is that President Biden announced that that the federal government was not going to implement a vaccine passport program. But what they also said was they were going to provide guidance for private companies who want to do that. And so that kind of punted the issue again. And then on top of that, we do know if you want to go see a Dodger game, or you want to go see a Giants game, or you want to go see the Lakers play, or the Clippers, or the 49ers, it's going to be, they're going to require that. They're going to require either proof of a recent vaccination or that's a passport. We don't really know. Of course, we don't really know what the rules are yet, if it's going to be the vaccination card, if there's going to be a central registry. I mean, again, you've got a lot of issues with respect to that. And then outside of California, there's, states, in a lot of states, they're basically already passing executive orders and legislation saying you can't mandate, you can't set up a vaccine passport program. So they're actually flat out refusing it. So I'm hoping, I say this probably 10 times a day, I'm hoping we're going to get guidance, because even if it says no, I mean, if the guidance were clear, then at least we know the rules of the road. But for customers, it seems to be different. Now, the sub question on that is, well, if my customers have to give me this information, how come my employees don't have to give me the information? It's on account of the law treats employees differently. As a customer, I've got a right to go. I've got a right to say I either want to go to that concert, I'm going to comply with the terms and conditions. If I go to a ball game, the back of my ticket has a liability waiver. If I get hit in the head with a baseball, I'm not going to sue the company. And that's a condition of going. You don't have to go if you're not willing to agree to that. So company makes the rules on that with respect to their customers. Employees are considered to be more captive. I don't mean that in a really bad negative sense, but employees feel often that they're coerced by their employers to do things or to not do things. And so the law treats employees differently when an employer mandates it. So you wind up with a real interesting disconnect. The best I can say is stay tuned. I mean, I'm hoping we get better guidance.
Yeah, I've got to say that's the big thing about this COVID is just how long we've been waiting for more details, and stuff comes out and then things change in another direction. It's a very complicated task. And
and again, to not repeat myself too much, but because these things only have emergency use authorizations, and we know that some people have adverse reactions, and we know J&J has now been paused, I think that means that, this is not like a flu shot. It's not like a shingle shot. It's not like a measles and mumps. It's not like the childhood inoculations. That's a whole other story. But the point is, these things are still, folks we are all a living experiment to the extent we're being vaccinated.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for all of the great detailed information that you've provided. I really appreciate you, giving it the careful thought that you have, and then offering to help Start Small, Think Big, to get the information out to their clients. You and Gray, as well as Pam, are doing a wealth of service to the small businesses out there who are trying to deal with all this ambiguity, trying to understand what their best paths forward are. And it's really great to know that there are resources out there that make it possible for those businesses to navigate that, and that they can enter into a long-term client relationship with Start Small, Think Big, or even if they don't match the eligibility requirements with Start Small, Think Big, they can still engage in the rapid response program so that they can get some assistance, so pro bono assistance from the lawyers at your firm there at Cozen, as well as other resources like free counseling from the folks at SCORE or SBDC or any of the other many partners that are offering the assistance.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to help.
We've gotten after our 5 o'clock objective in terms of ramping up. I'm not seeing any additional questions. So with that, what I'll do is let everybody who's attending know that our intention is to send out these presentations in the next couple of days so that you'll receive that. We'll also provide you with a link to the recording, which will be available through YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it afterwards. If there were pieces of Ed's commentary, or if you want to hear what great thoughts I had at the beginning, you can go back and listen to them again and again. So we want to make sure that you're able to get this information and be able to share it with others if you're so inclined. So we'll be able to get you that. One last thing is that we would like it if you would, after this is over, if you would fill out the survey. That helps us better understand what we can do better and what you liked best about the programs. Again, remember that this is part of an ongoing presentation series that we're offering, and we'll be offering an office hours next week. So please keep your eye out for additional things. Again, thank you very much to all the presenters. Thank you also to the interpreters. We couldn't have done this without you. And thank you to the audience, because we wouldn't have done it without you. So thank you very much. Have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Stay safe.